That is basically treating humans as machines. We turn ourselves into the tools that we build with. And I think that we're about to be freed from that, which I think has been basically an indentured servitude that we have been through since the 1800s. And so I think a bright future awaits humanity if we choose to make it so, where we are all aristocrats, essentially. And instead of having slaves, we have robotic slaves. We have an army of machines working for each of us to keep us healthy, happy, productive in the ways that we choose.
Machines aren't coming, they're already here. And if you ask today's guest, they're not just taking jobs, they might be taking over. Welcome back to The Machine and Us, the podcast where we explore what it really means to stay human in an age of AI. I'm Cien, and in each episode, I sit down with visionaries, disruptors, and technologists to unravel the future that's already unfolding around us. Today, we have Dr. Duma, an AI researcher, entrepreneur, and public speaker who doesn't just study AI, but he's actually helping build the systems that will shape our future. With a PhD in natural language processing from the University of Edinburgh, experience at Google and Alexa, and a career spent pioneering AI-driven solutions, Daniel is at the forefront of automation, AI, and even longevity research. His take? AI will replace all productive knowledge jobs in the next 5 years. Within 15 years, we'll learn how to fully reverse aging, and the future, forever young and forever unemployed. We're diving into all of it. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's dive in. So you said that AI will take over all productive knowledge jobs in 5 years, which is bold. And I think we're already seeing AI reshape industries. What would be the tipping point? When will people actually feel the shift?
It's a great question. I wonder how more people are not feeling the shift, because I certainly am. So I come from things to do with software, where whether I was doing research or I was building products, I was writing code. I no longer write code. I only write English. In fairness, I could write Spanish or French, but English is convenient because your function names are in English and that kind of thing. But basically, I just give instructions to the computer who then does my bidding. Of course, it's not perfect. Of course, I still need to put in times debugging and stuff, but I'm already like at least a 3 to 4x multiple of productivity that I've, measured myself. So if people are not realizing this, they're not looking, is my feeling.
Absolutely. I was a product manager by trade, and I built an app in 2 weeks with user stories. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I build in user stories, which is fantastic. But debugging, you're right. Like I've had to build my own debugging copilot. But I guess in your field specifically, a lot of my network are software developers, and I think some of them are still in that uncertain phase where they are experimenting. But I think there is a adoption barrier. What is it? What do they need to do to basically change that perspective?
I have the feeling that this applies across industries and professions, that experts who have been experts for a long time and their, let's call it their job, their occupation, they know it inside out, and they have established workflows, processes, pipelines, and they are happy and comfortable with what they're doing. They're the ones that have the hardest time shifting to a new way of doing things when new technology comes. I've seen this in many fields, but certainly software engineering, I know more people than any other, where I speak to people who are astoundingly good developers, but have not even tried the tool because they think this is below me, right? They go to ChatGPT once, which is, by the way, really poor programming model. I would not recommend to use ChatGPT. I would recommend to use Cursor, Lovable Dev, Claude directly, DeepSeek, one of these, right? But anyway, they would just go to ChatGPT, ask it for something like, man, I don't like that code, like find some excuse to never look at it again. And then, 6 months pass, and then they go, whoa, hold on a minute, what's going on here? Like you just made that website in 20 minutes, it would have taken me 3 days. You know what I mean? So I think they really need to, I don't know, broaden their horizons to get out of their comfort zone, out of their local minimum, as we would say in machine learning, and look at what's out there with a broader, more open mind than, I already know how this is done. I'm an expert. You're not going to tell me anything new, right? They actually need to be a bit more open-minded is, I guess, the best I have. It works when you're personally advising people. Like, I have friends who were stuck in this local minimum, and I would go to them and say, "Man, you really need to try it. I've been through the exact same thing you're going through right now, and I've, the machine does better than I, and you would be multiplied in productivity, if you did it as well.
What I do find though is that there are so many products out there. There's so many great products and complex solutions out there, but they're still failing. I think the missing piece is the understanding of the human. And what I mean by that is, like the go to market, the kind of the selling element with the feature where I personally see that everyone can start building anything and everyone can turn an idea into a solution. What should software developers do specifically now to start building for people and not for the tech?
I mean, you're basically asking them to stop being software engineers and become entrepreneurs, become product managers, become, like kind of remove themselves from the implementation, right? And look at the, the user stories, right? The use cases, the requirements, like the need of the user, the problem. What is actually the problem? What is actually their existing workflow? Like, where would this thing click with their existing life, right? These are things that presumably you and I have been thinking about for years, but the common stereotypical archetypal software engineer doesn't, right? They just go, okay, there's this feature that's needed, so I have to think about the backend database and the REST endpoints and the, like front end thing and the hooks for React and how that updates. And, of course, that's important, but now that is being automated really, really, really fast. Assuming that that is going to be very soon fully automated to the point you need very little human involvement at all, the real question then becomes, what's the problem and how do you solve it? And what's the value add? And why would people use this? And how do you make it delightful to the user? And all those things that, of course, you have been thinking about for longer.
That resonates. I can talk about it for ever. I think because I meet so many software developers who have brilliant ideas and they have this like really complex tech and it's the best in the market, but I'm not winning customers. And I think that is like one challenge that I see with all of these innovators who can build amazing tech, who would be able can in theory be able to build more robust tech, but isn't able to because of that barrier. But anyway, moving on to next interest of mine is around reversing aging. So you believe that we're on the brink of reversing aging. How does AI factor into the longevity revolution? And do you see these two trends, AI and biotech, converging in a way that reshapes everything that we know about humanity?
Absolutely, yes. Completely on board with that. So how do I see it helping? Well, the incredible complexity of biological systems is superior to anything the human mind can handle. There's no way that you can model in your head in a useful way what happens, not even just inside a cell, but like inside a small part of an organelle of a cell. It's already so complex. So many things are interacting at the same time, and there's so much uncertainty about what's going on. We just cannot measure physically the proteins, the whatever complex is happening, the mRNA clicking here and there. All of these things are just extremely hard to measure in the physical world. And so you need to make some guesses about how things work, right? So you basically need to build a model of reality based on noisy and uncertain data. And I think that is where the increasing power of AI will help a lot, simply because we cannot read everything perfectly, right? If these essentially objects, right? These small bits of reality, right? That then combine into bigger bits and make cells and life happen, right? If we could measure everything with perfect accuracy, understanding biology and therefore aging and therefore how to reverse it would be a tractable problem. Will be something we could say, okay, we need to measure more and then we need to model more and then it's not a problem. But when it's so noisy, so messy, so expensive, so hard to scale, right? That's when the hope that this galaxy brain that we are building together, right, will figure things out in the absence of perfect data. So I think that's the big contribution of AI in this
A
realm.
couple of things that I want to explore there. One is the messy data. So when we talk about AI strategies now, we always start with let's clean up the data. Are you saying that that is not a necessary step and we just have to live with
That's
messy
not a
data?
possible step. Yeah, you just have messy data, and that's just the reality. The reality is messy. Even if you were able to measure it perfectly, you'll end up with quantum effects and uncertainty and all kinds of things like that. But we can't. We can't even measure it. So you just have to make a bunch of assumptions. You have to make a bunch of guesses. Now, an interesting example of what I was trying to say is AlphaFold. Have you heard of this? Essentially, I think a couple of years ago, but more recently last year, we've pretty much fully solved the protein folding problem. This problem is your DNA encodes proteins. Proteins are these combinations of like building blocks called amino acids, which are really, really small molecules. A bunch of atoms put together, right? And these proteins carry out functions, and those functions depend on their shape. And their shape is really hard to predict, even if you know the chain of amino acids that forms them, because they fold over themselves in 3 dimensions with attractions and repulsions between charges on these atoms, right? And it's a really, really hard problem to solve. And it took us many years to try to figure that out. And eventually we did. And we didn't do it by doing it like physicists would do it back in the day, like trying to understand processes doing formulas and saying, aha, I found the formula that predicts. No, we just fed it all into a magical black box, and the magical black box eventually figured out what the model is. But we don't understand that model any better than the black box. You see what I mean? So it's not super explainable. It's not a set of rules that we've uncovered. It's a set of approximate rules, a set of like likelihoods and uncertainties, and it's still not perfect. And we've solved the problem of proteins folding, but only in the shape that they keep when they are frozen, which is the only thing that we've been able to measure is crystallized protein. Right. So actually they're wobbling the whole time in real life, and they take different shapes, and those different shapes actually interact different ways with different other proteins. So it's a much more complex problem. But even the simple version of that problem, which is if the protein is not wobbling, is not moving, and it's in a crystal, what does it look like? So that problem we've solved, and we solved it with a black box that just, deduces things that we cannot comprehend.
Which is amazing. I did read about that, and that I think that is one of the actually all the contributions of AI in terms of biotechnology is revolutionary. But we have seen a lot of technology using data that is inherently biased. I've read a lot of case studies where there is a skew on the results of accuracy of some of these technology when, the data are from male or from white male versus female or from other sectors. So there is this machine that read x-rays, lung x-rays, and the accuracy of it detecting lung cancer within its kind of male data set was quite high. But then with a female data set, it was really skewed. It was low. So we've got examples like these where, the results of something, of an AI system is biased because of the skew of the data that it used to analyze results or diagnose. Can AI fix this? Or are we just going to be like, oh, it's messy data, we don't know, but this seems to be the more likely
Right.
answer?
But that's a fascinating example that you bring. I wasn't aware of it. I can tell you that the issue here is simply gathering the data, right? We just don't have a lot of useful data for training AIs with. It's not like the AI itself will fix the fact that it doesn't have good enough examples of what lung cancer looks like in females versus males, if that turns out to be a meaningful difference. That's another thing that maybe there was just no from the people collecting the data set, that was such an important thing, that you had to have like a balanced data set. But often, even if they were aware of it, maybe they just couldn't source enough data for both genders that was representative enough across ages and genders, and sex is the same, sorry, in this case, but for ethnicities, let's say, for different lifestyles. Maybe you want people who are obese and people who are not. Maybe, all kinds of things like that. I am just not aware of how important that would be for lung cancer detection. But what I can say is that it's an ongoing process. We just keep collecting more data, and we keep annotating more data. And in the health care sector specifically, one of the big issues we have is that the data is confidential. So your patient records are not publicly available unless you are in Sweden, in which case they are. Like for everyone, the whole country, you can have the health records of everybody and train models on all of that, which is, I think, amazing. And I would probably vote for that. I would say, yes, everybody's data should be available for research. The problem is when you are in the United States of America, which happens to be the ruling empire of this planet at this point, and the way they do things over there is like we're not going to insure you if we know that you have a disease. Therefore, everybody's patient records are very sensitive, and it's very important that nobody knows that you have a disease or you won't get health insurance, which is, as you can imagine, an absolute nonsensical way of doing things. But, that is a reality over there, and that's why that is so talked about. I think other people are also like super culturally sensitive to their privacy sometimes. In Germany, for example, people are extremely, extremely against their data being held anywhere else. I personally think that is counterproductive, particularly at the societal level, such as things that we have to deal with. So in summary, not enough data, hard to collect.
I agree. And that's why I'm like, take my data. Like, I want to be represented in these systems. But I think there is definitely that concern around privacy because of, fraud and scam and being able to utilize that data against you. But I just want to deep dive into that data. I think as how I understand, and I'm a layman, as how I understand AI learns. And now we're starting to use synthetic data to help train it. And now we've got DeepSeek, using smaller models being trained as well. So they're doing a different type of reinforcement learning that is basically using AI systems to reinforce each other's learning. And how I understood the
exact opposite,
explanation.
actually.
Sorry?
Sorry to interrupt here, but DeepSeek, one of their big contributions is actually the exact opposite. Instead of using AI systems to give the reinforcement, so the reward to a model that is trying to learn, which is what everybody was doing before, they actually get rid of that. That's their big contribution. One of their 3 big contributions with R1 is instead of using another model for the reward, they use basically hand-coded like heuristic rewards, and that works better. That's one of the big things.
Which is amazing. But then thank you for that clarification. My point was around like so I think is that a human hard coding the reward system?
It's like they find specific problems to train it on that are, that the right solution for, that the right answer. And so at every point when it gets closer, it's easier to reward it because it's getting closer, because you actually know this is things like math and physics, like things that are known to be true or not to be true kind of thing. And it seems that just works. And by just doing generic reinforcement learning on that model,
which is amazing, because my point was like,
as well.
Yeah. If we are, with the traditional way of reinforcing the systems, and we're training, and now we're starting to train it with a lot of synthetic data. And if it's learning by itself with that same data, would it ever be possible to diversify how it thinks based on by feeding it diverse data? Like, how does that look like? And is it probable to be diversified?
I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve downstream. If you are looking for a specific diversity in thought or, like the output, whatever that output looks like, whether it's you're creating images and you want diverse ethnicities being represented in them, or you're outputting text and you want diversity of styles that you can pick from or something like that, you just need to feed the right type of data in the right amounts. And it's basically like it's making a soup or something. You put the right kind of thing in the blender and and then you hit the button. So just if you want more of that data being spit out, then you need more of the data put in. I think that's the simplest way to look at it.
Yeah, no, that really fascinates me, like to think about like how to, as a layman, run tests on these systems to see if I'm well represented, and if that model was to use in something important, like how do I try to make sure that I am represented? So yeah, it is. I find it fascinating. Anyway, so there's a huge debate right now around AI generated content, whether that's text, images, or music. You've worked on retrieval augmented generation and LLMs. Do you think AI can ever truly create something original?
I think the differential in originality between what comes out of one of these models and what comes out of a human has reduced to the point that it's indistinguishable. And I say this because there have been some studies on it, and whatever it is that you're measuring, preference in terms of aesthetics, preference in terms of I don't know, accuracy representing a prompt or something like that. There's been a bunch of studies where they show that people prefer AI generated images. It depends, right? I mean, of course, I can't really say that every single time this is going to be true, but there have been studies where they show that people pick the AI generated thing instead of the human thing. It's more the artsy things, more like we do some sort of like artistic representation. Again, that very test might be biased. So, I can't say that this is super well established, but it does help me make this claim, which is that, they're as creative as a human is. Ultimately, we all do the same thing. We take input, we build a model of what that input looked like, and then we create output based on our inputs. Our brains are not that different from the artificial brains we're creating, right? In fact, they're inspired. The artificial ones inspired in the biological ones, right? So we are also noise machines where if you put the right kind of data in, you get the right kind of data out. So this whole idea of like a human being some sort of magical creative creature, we take our inputs, we add a bunch of randomness and then combine them with other inputs and then that creates an output. That's how I see
So
it.
I'm not an art expert, but I am, like I do enjoy going around museums. And from what I've seen, art has evolved from a visual perspective. My hypothesis, again, this is just my own thinking. This isn't something someone probably has thought this originally, but there is a human element of wanting the different, of wanting the unique, like this notion of originality, and I'm gonna like this. The notion of the rebel, even. And from what you were saying, it seems like that is also an output. So is the input be different, and then the output is something that is nuanced from the common?
Yeah, good question. So I'm not an expert in art history by far, but as far as I'm aware, one of the drivers of the evolution of the representative arts, like painting and sculpture and stuff, has been the requirement to represent nature faithfully to immortalize it. So for a long time, painting was photography, was a way to immortalize your face and put it on a wall so that the next generations will see like what you looked like, right? Or to paint yourself in beautiful clothes, which is, I guess, what you do now with Gen AI, right? Like to paint yourself riding a dragon or something. Look how cool that would be, Before that, I don't know. I guess art, which is some sort of like natural human behavior, expression, whatever, right? Of like painting gazelles on the walls of caves, right? That must have had a different purpose, which might have been to invoke, the plentifulness, the abundance, or, be some sort of like religious, spiritual thing, or right? And of course, the religious and spiritual remains even to this day. There are still like religious paintings that are hung in churches and stuff. And I actually have a friend who makes them in the same style that's always been made. So those are still being made in the same way, right? So again, what's the purpose of art? Right? If art is photography, then like just to take reality as is and represent it the most realistically possible, right? That's one type of thing. And now we have cameras for that. If art is about expressing yourself, which is what came after photography, right? When the painters no longer were required to be faithful to what they saw. And they're like, well, I to express myself. It's about how I feel. It's about what I see in there, not what is there. Or let's just do something completely like hallucinatory, dreams like Dali or Picasso, whatever, and all this like surrealism and stuff. Cool. Like you get to the point that you can experiment, like bring a new dimension, a new purpose to it because you're no longer tied by presentation. So I wonder what's next for it now that we are also freed from, like illustration and, like all these, like the new type of painting, which was Photoshop. that's being automated, which I think is a great thing as well. But movies are also being automated. Like any representation of any potential possible reality will be commoditized. You'll be able to render any dream that you have, right? And dream new dreams. And very soon that will merge like the movie thing with the 3D representation that you can play as a video game. These things will come together for sure. Basically, we can create any world that we imagine. So will that be the ultimate art piece? Create the world in which you live.
Yeah, that is fascinating to think about. So I had this hypothesis where humans always like what's something, humans like the new. And in this phase of seeing a new thing that can create something spectacular, we're attracted to it. But eventually, my theory is that we'll go back to what's scarce and what's unique, and what would be then new would be human created. That is the hypothesis that I have. And that is based on what we pay for as consumers. Like, what do we think is valuable? And what is the most expensive art there is? And which fascinates me. So, but we shall see. Anyway, if someone's listening to this and feeling the existential dread, AI taking over their jobs, biological aging before solved, what's your advice to them? How should people be preparing for this future?
I tell this story wherever I go. That employment as we know it will soon end. The social organization and economic organization that we invented during the Industrial Revolution, which is you are an employee for some patron that pays you a certain amount and you work from this time to this time to produce this much and you are judged on that and rewarded based on your productivity and all of that. That is basically treating humans as machines. We turn ourselves into the tools that we build with. And I think that we're about to be freed from that, which I think has been basically an indentured servitude that we have been through since the 1800s. And so I think a bright future awaits humanity if we choose to make it so, where we are all aristocrats, essentially. And instead of having slaves, we have robotic slaves. We have an army of machines working for each of us to keep us healthy, happy, productive in the ways that we choose to be, right? To do anything that we want to do in the world to affect, a change upon the world. So I think it's great news. But I think this will come with a lot of disruption in the short term. And what I encourage people to do is to move from the expectation that you will be employed by somebody and told what to do and just paid wages to being more and more in control of how you fit inside society in a way that you also fit inside capitalism, and you can find, a way to exchange tokens that represent wealth, right, in the system so that it is sustainable. And so, yeah, I recommend that everyone should become an entrepreneur. And I have a little plug to make here, which is that this is why I'm working on the AI co-founder, building this thing called NED for non-executive director with Ash, our common friend. And we are trying to help people do exactly that. Become the entrepreneurs that they don't feel they're ready to be, because finding the right co-founder is hard. You need to find somebody who clicks with you on like vision, mission, passion, who clicks on you in terms of ego, won't like fight you for being the boss, or doesn't want you to be their boss, or whatever it is, will be reliable and trustworthy and productive and all of those things. We, instead of trying to help you find a co-founder, we're making a co-founder for you. So that's what I'm working on now.
I love it. I'm so excited for that. Yeah, and we share the same thesis. And I also say this thing, since the Industrial Revolution, we as people have measured ourselves against how much money we make, how intelligent we are. Like if we're intelligent, we're successful, or if we're making money, we're successful, or if we're productive, we're successful. But now it's changing. So my last question to you is, and you've answered this in many ways, but I just want you to answer it again. What would it mean to be human in the time of intelligent machines?
It's a great question that I wish I had a simple answer to. I think it's an answer we all need to create together. I don't see a way of predicting it until the whole of society has come together on some agreement, right? Of what it will mean. And to mean in the sense of purpose, right? Sense of like, why do you even exist, right? And there was a really interesting talk from Mark Zuckerberg. I think it's from 2016, if I remember correctly. There was this Harvard commencement address that he did, where he says, all of you people of Harvard, recent graduates, etc. I don't worry for you. Right, you will find something to do in life, even after we've automated all jobs. This was like a bunch of years ago, but he was already saying these prescient things. And he said, your task is not to find purpose for yourselves, but to find purpose for everybody else as we automate away the jobs that give them purpose. And he gives a bunch of ideas about where that could come from. Community, of course, number one. Of course, he would say that, building Facebook, but community. He mentions religion. That's not my particular preferable thing, but find meaning in life that isn't about being productive. This is what we need to do, and we need to be able to organize society in such a way that everybody is still incentivized to do something. Not to jump out of a window or to just sit on a sofa in the metaverse or whatever, right? But actually to do something with their life while not needing to do anything, to have food and healthcare and education and transport and protection and, all of the basic things. Maslow pyramid of needs, right? We need to cover, I'd say 85% of that by default, and then empower people to fill the top of the pyramid, that little triangle at the top of like self-actualization, self-improvement, etc. That's how I see it.
Beautiful. And that's a wrap on today's episode of The Machine and Us. Daniel, your perspective is both exhilarating and terrifying, which is exactly why we need to have this conversation. From AI's takeover of knowledge work to the possibility of reversing aging, it's clear we're heading into a future that's going to challenge everything we thought we knew. For those of you listening, what do you think? Are we heading toward a golden age of AI-powered longevity or crisis of purpose in a world where machines do all the work? Drop your thoughts, send me a message, or share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. If you want to keep up with Daniel's work, you can find him on LinkedIn or follow his research in AI and longevity biotech. All its links are going to be in the comment section below. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and stay human.